So I told myself I wasn't going to order a bunch of books online while I was out traveling this time. Lo and behold, who could have guessed I did it? I'm going to show you all of these books. I'm going to do something different now. I'm trying to upgrade these haul videos where instead of just showing you the covers of the books and saying, isn't that a book? I've actually done a few minutes of research about each of these individual books in pursuit of trying to make the videos a little more informative, a little more interesting, and also of trying to deepen my own knowledge of science fiction and fantasy. We'll just pull off the top. This is The Space Olympics by A.M. Leitner, an obscure writer of juvenile fiction for the most part, real name Alice Leitner Hawk. One of three Alices, along with Alice Norton, also known as Andre Norton, and Alice Sheldon, aka James Tiptree Jr., who changed their names to masquerade as male authors in order to appease a mostly male readership because of sexist norms of the time. She is obviously not as famous as the other two. Produced what is considered mostly minor work. This is, I think, a minor work among minor works, but seems to get relatively high marks on Goodreads, although it's not very well known. An oddity for sure, not one that I've really seen before. This book I have seen before, actually, Living with the Llama by T. Lobsang Rampa. I found a copy of this at the same used bookstore in Chiang Mai, Thailand, where I got, oh, what's the name of this famous one, the one that I reviewed? His big hit, The Third Eye, his first book. Allegedly named Tuesday Lobsang Rampa, real name Cyril Hoskins. He was a British plumber who developed this story about how he fell out of a tree in his yard and gave himself a concussion, and the disembodied spirit of a dead Tibetan Lama came and asked him for permission to share his body with him. And Cyril said, yes, you may be, I will be your vessel in this mortal world to spread your message of enlightenment. Became this big new age figure, guru guy, not as famous anymore, but was exposed on television by a number of journalists after The Third Eye became a big phenomenon, and people just went with it. Even after they learned that he was merely a plumber, people suspended their disbelief and lied to themselves that he really was the Lama, and had a long career for a few decades publishing these shitty books. Third Eye was a shitty book. This is apparently much worse. This is a book allegedly written by his cat and transmitted to him psychically. Cat named like Mr. Gray Whiskers or something. I'm not going to hunt around and find it, but apparently this is just terrible. And it's especially funny because this is only the 6th book that he ever published. So it wasn't like it was late in his career when he was just at a loss for ideas. Or maybe he was, maybe just ran out of, lies by this point and wrote a book as his cat. But I've avoided picking up Rampa books until this one. This is the one that I really wanted, and I found it a couple of days ago. Not all of these I bought online. In fact, most of these I think I picked up in the past few days, just hunting around. The Seed of Earth by Robert Silverberg is from, I believe, 1962, if memory serves. This is, 62. This is at the tail end of his first initial period as a writer before he became a new waver. It's considered a sort of minor book. There's a lottery system on Earth to select colonists to colonize alien worlds. This guy gets his name pulled in the draft, is shipped out with a bunch of other people to this alien world where they're enslaved by aliens and they have to conspire to try to escape. Haven't read it. It's supposed to be a sort of so-so Silverberg. It's in this 90s livery. This is a much more famous Silverberg, Night Wings. It's a fix-up of 3 novellas originally published in Galaxy. The title story, actually this book, this fix-up won, what was it, a Hugo or a Nebula? It won the pre-prize. It's got pre in there in 76. I think. Memory is starting to falter here. Heavily decorated book. It's one of his famous ones from early on in his New Wave arc. I actually have read the first half or so of this back pre-book pilled, before I really finished all the books, or most of the books that I started. It's a Dying Earth set of stories where human beings have niched down into hyper specializations following an alien invasion, an alien conquest of Earth that was pushed back in their distant history. And the protagonist is a man whose sole responsibility in life is to monitor the skies with this piece of tech for signs of the return of the aliens. And he thinks that he has found such a sign, and it's a dilemma as to whether or not he will sound the alarm, because if he sounds the alarm incorrectly, I think he will be put to death or he'll be exiled from his society. I believe this is heavily influenced by Greek myth. It has been a while since I read it, but interesting book. One of the more highly esteemed Silverberg books. Guns of Avalon by Zelazny is book 2 in the Amber series. Unremarkable, except that apparently there was a sex scene that did not make it past the censor board and was excised from this book and then republished later as part of a best of Zelazny short stories collection, volume 3 in the 1990s, I'm pretty sure it was. So you can find that salacious material if you want it. Vonda McIntyre, Barbary. This is a juvenile. It's about some girls sneaking a cat onto a spaceship. Sorry, the light is not perfect for this. Vonda McIntyre is an interesting figure, and I'll talk about her while talking about this, her first novel, The Exile Waiting. This apparently takes place in the same universe as Dreamsnake, her most famous book, which I didn't know. It's a post-apocalyptic, post-nuclear war world where there's only one remaining high-tech city on the whole planet called Center that's underground. And it's a slave society, and a character who lives in the city is attempting to escape via the help of some off-worlders who may or may not be allies after all. Haven't read the book, but it sounds interesting. I would be interested in reading it. McIntyre also is interesting in that she was she a Futurian? She was certainly an esteemed female writer of science fiction and feminist writer of science fiction. I may be getting my figures mixed up, but I believe that she was also married to, no, I'm thinking of Virginia Kidd. Kidd was married to Blish. All right, memory the trapdoor has opened. I have lost some of my fidelity of memory with McIntyre. There is more that she did that is worthy of note, but I guess that I had a brain fart. 3 of the Elric books, we know these. This is Sailor on the Seas of Fate. This is The Sleeping Sorceress. And this is Stormbringer in these slightly gaudy trade paperbacks with the Michael Whelan cover art in just a tiny little aperture. Deserves more of the cover, I feel. These are a little confusing because the chronological order of the Elric stories are all mixed up, and sometimes they're arranged by publication date, other times they're arranged in order of like the internal chronology of the stories themselves. Certain collections will have certain stories, and there's not seemingly like an established canon unless you take all of them together. Also, there have been 3 or 4 different cycles of Elric stories. Those are from the originals, which are like the most influential, the most important. This is interesting. This is a copy of Universe 1, edited by Silverberg and Karen Haber. The 2 of them are still married. They are both still living. And this is the first Universe anthology that was published after Terry Carr's death. This was one of his main vehicles. He would commission original short stories from science fiction and fantasy writers for publication in his Universe books. I've reviewed one of them before, Universe 5. And the Universe series is responsible for a lot of really important short fiction work. And this is from '91, I believe, and this is the first of 3 post-Terry Carr universes that Silverberg and Haber were responsible for, and I think there's some interesting stuff in here. The Le Guin story, the Shobies story, won a Nebula, I'm pretty sure, for Best Short Fiction, and there's a Grania Davis in here, Bruce Sterling, a bunch of names I don't recognize, and a Kim Stanley Robinson story that's supposed to be pretty good. It's got a cool cover. Interesting curiosity, Riding Around in Rigs on the Lake, 2nd edition by Paula Thornburn. This is a classic in the genre of rigs on lakes. It's full of some pretty interesting original photos of the rigs. I just flipped past one. There's a section in the middle showing the lake. There's some rigs on the lake, so that was an interesting find. We're getting through all the trade paperbacks here, and we have a couple of hardcovers too. H.P. Lovecraft Goes to the Movies. These are the Lovecraft stories that movies were based on. Colorado Space, Pickman's Model, Call of Cthulhu, Reanimator. You can slice Lovecraft's body of work so many different ways. Here is a book club hardcover of Analog 2 by John W. Campbell. Campbell, one of the most, arguably the most important editor in all of science fiction history. This anthology apparently, unfortunately, is not all that strong. The only 4 names that I recognize are Campbell himself, Mac Reynolds, who wrote a story called Good Indian that sounds very racist to me, James Schmitz, Christopher Anvil. Those are the people I recognize. The rest of them I don't. Apparently this is pretty run-of-the-mill pulp, space opera, hard SF type stuff. It does have a really fetching cover IMO. Speaking of Moorcock, Elric at the End of Time. That is Michael Whelan's most iconic ever artwork. That hair metal cover. I really just wanted a copy of this because it's kind of hard to find and I didn't have one, so I bought 3 Moorcock books so that I can resell these and it'll cover the cost of this. Speaking of reselling, a lot of these are going to be up on Whatnot. I run Whatnot auctions, so I'm going to be running a lot of Whatnot auctions. There's a link down below in the description and in the pinned comment that will take you to a page where if you sign up for an account, Whatnot will give you $15 in free credit that you can use towards books. You still have to pay for shipping on top. And if you do that, they also give me a $5 credit that I can use to acquire books for myself. They have not arrived in the mail yet, but I have a few that are pretty impressive. I got an old hardcover, ancient hardcover of Paradise Lost with the Gustave Doré etchings. It looks just gorgeous. So you can use that credit to get free books for me. You still have to pay shipping on top. Details will be down below. Warhound and the World's Pain. This book I already have a copy of. I had not read the synopsis before and it sounds like it kicks ass. Actually, John Clute says that this is better than the Runestaff series, which is one of Moorcock's famous kind of alternate histories or plays on history. We'll get to that soon. This takes place during the 30 Years' War, and it sounds a lot actually like God's Demon by Wayne Barlow. This guy stays in a castle owned by Satan, who sends him on a quest to find the Holy Grail so that Satan might be redeemed in the eyes of a morally ambiguous God and be accepted back into heaven. I'm probably going to read this soon because that just sounds extremely like my kind of thing, and it's got the kick-ass cover, so probably a big recommend there. We'll see. Mad God's Amulet is Volume 2 in the history of the Runestaff, which is a far future science fantasy series that's an inversion of World War II, where Great Britain is an imperialistic, can you imagine such a thing, aggressor, and Germany is the good guys, and this led on to the Castle Brass sequence that followed this. Both are part of the Hawk Moon sequence, which itself is part of the Eternal Champion cycle that spans for Moorcock's entire career. I've not read any of these. I found the first Castle Brass when I was in Thailand, and I dropped it because I had not read these. At some point, I will read them. Among the Dead and Other Events Leading to the Apocalypse by Edward Bryant. This was, I feel, the first major reward for me, slowing down and actually looking into these books and spending time with them, because I had never heard of this. I would have discarded this as a nothing, you know, the confirmation bias of I haven't heard of this, therefore it's probably not important. Edward Bryant is an interesting new waver, and I was kind of flipping through this before Googling his name, and the publications, the magazines that these short stories were pulled from is stuff like Orbit by Damon Knight, New Dimensions, Quark, so on, so on. This apparently is an incredibly dark, grim, Thomas Dishian collection of new wave stories that sound totally brutal and weird, and pretty critically lauded. And I had seen one of his other books, actually, Cinnabar. I'd seen floating around. I don't recall if I have a copy of it or not, but it was like one of those books that kind of tickles at the back of the brain of maybe that's something interesting. I'm hanging on to this and reading it because the reviews of this sound really interesting. There's all kinds of these sort of like, this sounds really derogatory, but like C-lister new wavers, people like Langdon Jones or Pamela Zoline, who internally, if you know a lot about the new wave, are known people, but outside of that are just not famous names, but produced like really strange, strikingly weird material. And I get the impression that Edward Bryant might be one of those people, so we'll be looking in to him. Speaking of the new wave, J.G. Ballard's Billennium. This is his first ever collection of short stories. I have read a handful of them, I believe. Some of these are Vermilion Sands stories, and it ends with The Garden of Time, a short story that I've reviewed before that I think is excellent. I already have a copy of this, so I'll be selling that one. The Coming of the Terrans by Lee Brackett, I also have a copy of. These are not Eric John Stark of Mars stories, but they are similar. This is compared to Martian Chronicles by Bradbury a lot. These are planetary romance stories about human beings from Earth on a Mars, Barosian Mars, in the end of its days, sort of like dying Earth / dying Mars setting. These old, decadent, ancient Martian civilizations kind of hanging on by the skin of their teeth, and in step adventuring humans. Sounds really good. I really like Lee Brackett. I think that her Dreaming Pole material is some of the absolute strongest that I've read. I've actually never read Edgar Rice Burroughs, somewhat by design, but maybe at some point I will dip in. If the Stars Are Gods by Gregory Benford and Gordon Eklund. This is worked up off of a short story by the same name that they both co-authored that I think won a Nebula. It was a popular story. This book apparently is not as good. People call it philosophical, but also say that it's just bad. Apparently it has aged poorly in a few of its aspects and is boring. It's about aliens who orbit the moon, and there's a guy that Earth sends to join their ship to be astrogator for them, and they are convinced that stars might be living things, is the impression I got based on the synopsis. But just not something I'm super interested in. The Impossible Man by J.G. Ballard, another early short story collection. This apparently has a focus of, it's got a bunch of Vermilion Sand stories in it and a bunch of stories that take place on the beach. So it's kind of a softer, more pastoral J.G. Ballard. It does have Stormbird, Storm Dreamer in it, which is the first story in the disaster area, which is a great story and a great collection. I think I've read a couple others of these, but I don't really recall. At some point, I'm probably going to wind up reading all the J.G. Ballard books that I have on hand. This one is really interesting. Another one that I probably would have tossed aside as kind of an also ran, something not particularly interesting, just because of the aesthetics. The Face and the Frost by John Bellairs. Terry Carr, no, Lynn Carter, sorry, I get the two confused a lot. Lynn Carter said this is one of the 3 best fantasy books published since Lord of the Rings. It is this guy, John Bellairs' take on Lord of the Rings. He has a Gandalf figure in it called Prospero, who is Gandalf except imbued with all of the neuroses and insecurities of Bellairs himself. And it's supposed to be this like very strange midpoint between fantasy and horror that is written as a juvenile, but can be enjoyed as adult literature. It came out in the 70s. And opinions are mixed, but everybody said online that I could find that it was a very like notably distinct, hard to describe book that has a sort of solemn character. And I'm very interested in reading this. It is illustrated. Most of his books were illustrated by Edward Gorey. This was not, but this is also on Appendix N for the first D&D. So I'm probably going to read that. I'm going to hang on to that one. I meant to start a little pile of the stuff that I'm keeping. I guess I didn't do that. So I don't know, maybe that is the pile. Maybe I'm keeping these two so far. Burning World by J.G. Ballard. This is the original title of The Drought. The Drought has additional material. This is more concise, more edited. I'm probably going to keep this just because it's a somewhat uncommon artifact, and I don't have a copy. The Drought is The Drought. It's an impressive book. I think certainly my favorite of the original disaster cycle. Exiles of Time by Nelson Bond. Nelson Bond wrote in the 1940s. He did not publish as much in the science fiction pulps, mostly published in a magazine called Blue Book, The Blue Book, that was more literary, more prestigious, and he wrote sort of like Fantastica with a K, science fiction-esque stuff, and then was sort of incorporated into genre SF afterwards. Apparently this book is notable for both being incredibly racist against Arabs and also for being an interesting science fictional retelling of the story of the destruction of Asgard by way of an archaeologist who finds a magical talisman that transports him back in time 30,000 years, where he has to confront an alien menace passing by on a comet that might result in the death of all the gods in heaven. Might not be getting that totally accurate. I haven't read it. I will never read it probably, but sort of a historical curiosity, that book. I also found quite a few of the Kafka books, books 6 through 22 of the Kafka series by Barry Sadler. That is Barry Sadler. He is rather blurry. Let's see if we can get him in focus. All right, there. That's Barry Sadler. You might recognize Barry Sadler if you've never seen these Kafka books, because he's the guy who wrote the song, The Ballad of the Green Berets, and performed it. That was his claim to fame. He was a veteran of the Vietnam War. He was a Green Beret. He was deployed for about a year and then was honorably discharged and had the hit song, tried to get a singer-songwriter career going after that, never found the same level of success as he did from The Ballad of the Green Beret, and then retired and started, retired from public life as such and started writing these Kafka books, probably, although there are fan theories, although unsubstantiated, that a lot of these books were ghost-written, namely possibly by Kenneth Bulmer, who people think might have written Kafka Panzer Soldier, which is, if not one of the most popular, certainly one of the most valuable of the Kafka, and rare, which I know from having resold a bunch of these on eBay over the course of my life as a reader and reseller. Sadler is kind of interesting because of really like his personal biography. Apparently, he was sentenced to a stint in prison for voluntary manslaughter of the former boyfriend of his then girlfriend, who showed up in a parking lot to harass them, and Sadler ended up shooting and killing him, and then allegedly planting a gun on him in his van after the fact to try to frame him or frame the death as self-defense. But his sentence was commuted to like 30 days of public service. So Sadler, interesting character. I've never tried to read the Kafka stories. They seem questionable. I will say it's kind of like Ernest goes to Africa, you know, Ernest goes to the Middle East, Kafka goes to ancient Sumeria and kills a bunch of Sumerians. It's sort of, the premise is the Roman soldier who speared Jesus when he was on the cross is cursed to live as a mercenary until the second coming of Christ. So it's sort of like religious, military, science fiction, fantasy stuff. Anyway, all of these are going to go up on eBay at some point as a lot. I could hold off until I get the first 5, if I get the first 5, in which case it'll be worth more, but these are pretty collectible anyway. I kind of just want to get them out the door. The Jagged Orbit by John Brunner is part of his Club of Rome quartet, which includes Stand on Zanzibar, Sheep Look Up, and The Shockwave Rider, and also this one. This is the least famous among them, and it is his race relations book. Yeah, you know, Brunner's heart was in the right place. I've said that a few times. I haven't read this one. I'm a little bit skeptical of it, but there's a lot to praise in Brunner and in his work and in the other books. I've not read The Shockwave Rider. I've read the other 2. They are notable in that he was one of the first people to write these long science fiction books as long science fiction books, as long novels. This was really not common. And he, like, Stand on Zanzibar was one of the first books along with, well, I was about to say along with Dune, but Dune was written and serialized as Dune World first. It wasn't written and published as a novel, whereas Stand on Zanzibar was, as this one was. You get the point. 4 for Tomorrow by Roger Zelazny is his first ever short story collection. This is historically an important one and critically praised up the ass, or out the ass. Doors of His Face, Lamps of His Mouth was nominated for a Hugo and won a Nebula, and A Rose for Ecclesiastes was also nominated for a Nebula. The Furies and Graveyard Heart also are supposed to be classics and excellent. Zelazny, I have found to be hit or miss, but this is supposed to be some of his best material, at least in the eyes of critics, although good readers say maybe not. Sometimes that's a good sign. This is a Zelazny that I would personally be interested in reading. Sands of Mars by Arthur C. Clarke is his first ever novel, described as sort of gentle, optimistic, easy to read, but sort of serious-minded and adult-feeling hard science book that was written about space travel before space travel. It's not super duper a big claim to fame. All science fiction that predates the first manned space flight meets those criteria, but Clarke is often praised for getting a lot of those forecasted details about what space travel would actually be like correct in the first place. And this is supposed to be relatively good for Clarke, although I have found Clarke to be a little dry, slightly boring. Game Players of Titan by Philip K. Dick, I have read and reviewed. I think that it is too frenetic. I think it is Dick kind of going like this on the keyboard while on amphetamines, and I will credit it for being one of the inspirations for Tactics of Conquest by Malzberg, one of my favorite books from Malzberg, and therefore one of my favorite books. Invaders from Rigel by Fletcher Pratt. Apparently it sucks. Platt, let me try to remember details about Pratt. I really don't. I just remember that this was supposed to be pretty bad. I think Fletcher Pratt, yes, I got it. He's most remembered for the Enchanter series that he co-wrote with Elsbreg de Camp, and he was also a bit of a socialite behind the scenes. He owned a property called the Ipsy Pipsy Institute or something, the Droopsy Poopsy, I think it's Ipsy Pipsy or something like that. It was a mansion in the Highlands of New Jersey. I didn't realize that New Jersey had highlands, but it was this mansion, 31-room mansion out in the middle of nowhere, where Pratt and his wife would host social events. Were they key parties? I just am completely fabricating that fantasy, but I want to believe that he was up to no good along with the rest of them during the, I think, 1940s and 50s. Sort of related to the Hydra Club in New York, and Platt also had an apartment in New York with his wife where they would host Hydra Club events, but there was this Illuminati, eyes wide shut mansion out in the New Jersey woods that was popular with a bunch of science fiction writers of the time. Who's to say? Who's to say? Probably they sat around and talked about asteroids. Fun to think about though. Outpost Mars by Cyril Judd. A name that I recognized, another reward for old Book Pilled for slowing down and actually learning, sitting his ass down and learning. This is the pen name of Cyril Kornbluth and Judith Merrill, who wrote 2 books under this name. This one and, oh, what were they? What was it? Starts with a D. I'll put it up. I'll put it up here. There was like a series of short stories that they co-wrote. I love Kornbluth. I read a Merrill book recently. I didn't really care for her writing so much, but she's a totally fascinating character. Very important Futurian. I think the first female Futurian, had relationships with a bunch of famous science fiction authors, you know, romantic and platonic alike, was really influential, really important. And Kornbluth himself is totally fascinating, underappreciated character, also a Futurian as well. Do I remember anything about this other than the fact that it was written by the 2 of them and has the Richard Powers cover? No, not really, but I'm probably going to keep this because I'm very attached to Kornbluth especially, so that's going in the Matt pile. Out of the Silent Planet by C.S. Lewis, not a super rare book per se, but never found this ace. No, it's an Avon. Feels like an ace in the hand, but that's an Avon. I've never found a copy this old. This apparently was written in pseudo-collaboration with Tolkien. They had like a gentleman's agreement, I guess, or they just came to the decision that if Lewis were to write a science fiction story, that Tolkien would write a time travel story. The science fiction story turned into this, which turned into the Space Trilogy, which is an enduring classic science fiction / science fantasy, depending on your perspective, series. And Tolkien never finished his time travel story. I don't know if it's in one of those apocryphal collections or not. I don't even know what the name of it was. But I already have copies of the 3 Space Trilogy books. I'm not frankly all that interested in them because apparently Lewis deliberately wrote them to smuggle theology into genre fiction, masquerading as romanticism. He has this amazing quote that's like, these days you can pass off any amount of theology you want under the guise of romanticism or something. And apparently it's very like religiously didactic, and I just don't know that I'm that enthusiastic to spend a bunch of time reading that, but probably at some point I will because it's historically important. But I thought that anecdote about Tolkien was interesting. Journey to the Center of the Earth by Verne. I like this book a lot. I learned a couple of interesting tidbits. Apparently the 2 translations of this book that are public domain that you can download for free on Project Gutenberg are the 2 worst. The first one, the earliest one, takes enormous liberties with the original text, changes around character names, cuts out a bunch of material and like retitles the chapters and moves a bunch of stuff around. And then the other one that's slightly more recent does a lot of the same stuff. Apparently it's not as egregious, but those are probably best avoided. And there's been a ton of translations, but I guess the 2 most recent into English from 2009 and 2022, people seem to really like, especially the most recent one from 2022. I saw a lot of people online praising that one. I don't remember which one I read. I think actually it might have been this one. I think I read this same edition. I really don't remember, but this is the Willis T. Bradley translation. The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. I'm going to read this pretty soon, I think. I think this copy is just absolutely gorgeous. One of my favorite Wells covers. Totally, totally enamored of this book. And I didn't know, apparently this shares an important influence with Lord of the Rings. There is part of Plato's Republic called the Ring of Gigas. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, but there's a ring in Plato's Republic where it's a thought experiment where the person who wears it, if the ring turns them invisible and their behavior becomes sociopathic because they are not observed. And this is a direct science fictional interpretation of that myth. And then that was the thing that inspired the One Ring, turning its wearers invisible and corrupting them spiritually. I thought that that was kind of cool. Out of Time's Abyss by Edgar Rice Burroughs. This is book 3 in, I don't remember the name of it, but there's a trilogy of books, like a Lost Continent dinosaur series. I think the first one is The Land That Time Forgot, and then the second one is The People That Time Forgot. Yeah, The Land That Time Forgot and The People That Time Forgot, part of the Caspic series. Aesthetically, it's cool. I should read Burroughs at some point. I don't know. My hopes are dim for him. Against the Fall of Night by Arthur C. Clarke, I thought was just the original title of Against the Fall of Night. No, that's this book. What is it called? Oh God. I'll put the thing up here. What is the name of it? I thought that this book was just a republication of this, but apparently this one came out in 53, that one came out in 56, and this is an entirely different book. It shares all the same settings and plot and character, so I guess not entirely different, but the later one was a complete rewrite of this, so this is a totally different text. Would be interesting to read both of them together, I think. I've only read the latter one. It's, I think, one of the better Clarkes. Envoy to New Worlds by Keith Laumer. This is the first of the Retief series. He's most famous for the Retief books and for the Bolo books, which is about evolving tanks in the future, super tanks. This is based on his own experience working in the diplomatic service post-World War II. I think that maybe there's a bit of biographical overlap with Cordwainer Smith, or what's his actual name? I don't remember. But Cordwainer Smith was sort of like a secret agent, worked closely with American intelligence to influence, we will say, affairs in Asia especially, and Laumer worked for many years as a diplomat himself. The Retief stories are expressions of his own frustration with the old guard, the pre-World War II like establishment of diplomats who, by his accounting, were mired in bureaucracy and protocol and were too slow to move to adapt to new changing political realities and facts on the ground. So this is sort of like James Bondy type stories about a maverick, freewheeling diplomat doing things not by the book, being being his own man, marching to the beat of his own drum. Ted Sturgeon despised these stories, referred to them as racist in truly the strongest imaginable terms. Some would argue way too strong. Go look that quote up if you're curious, but I've not read them. I've actually not read Laumer. I learned also apparently that Laumer, in the later part of his career, wrote fiction that could be described as new wave fiction, which I would be very interested to read. I think I want to read Dinosaur Beach, which is a standalone that he's pretty famous for. I want to read, there's one that has a Wayne Barlow cover that's totally gorgeous that I want to read because it has the Barlow cover. And actually Barlow did a bunch of covers for Baen reissues in the 80s of these Retief stories, and Laumer rejected the covers because Barlow made Retief blonde. Very good point, Keith. You got the best artist in the world to do your covers, and I guess that's important. Mission to the Stars by Van Vogt. I'm contemplating keeping this and reading it because it's supposed to be like not that good, but it's supposed to be quintessential Van Vogt. It's one of the earliest known fix-up novels. That's where you take science fiction short stories that are thematically linked and you mash them up into a novel, maybe write a little bit of connective material to make it all hang together. That's something that Van Vogt either invented or popularized in the first place, and this is one of the first examples of it. And this is apparently a great example of Van Vogt being this madman. He's famous for just cramming his books with way, way, way too many ideas, kind of clumsily, and being this madcap writer. He was a major influence on Philip K. Dick. And the synopsis of this sounds pretty amazing. One of the ideas in here is that there are spaceships so enormous that they require hundreds of captains to control them, and they can splinter off into like thousands of separate spaceships and stuff, and a bunch of stuff like that. And Van Vogt heads swear by this one, and I feel like all right, I've decided I do want to keep that one, and I might read that pretty soon. The Third Quark anthology. This is number 3 of 4. This was a short-lived quarterly literary magazine edited and published by Delaney and Marilyn Hacker, who at the time were married. And this is the most avant-garde of the new wave material of the time, apparently. This was possibly intended to be the American response to Moorcock's New Worlds. And apparently this is the artsiest and the fartsiest science fiction material that was available to them. And these books are just full of like some of the most important names. I'm looking at Joanna Russ, Lafferty, Virginia Kidd, M. John Harrison, a bunch of other people I don't recognize, and because I don't recognize them, I also am interested. I just am flipping around and I flipped past 2 different poems, but also they're all illustrated. I now have, I think, all 4 of them. One of them I have in storage. I'm not sure which one, but I'm pretty sure I have all of them. I'm definitely keeping that one. Here's one that is both very interesting and very not interesting. 5 Odd by Groff Conklin. Interesting because, both interesting and not interesting because there are 0 reviews of this anywhere on the internet. There are no ratings, no reviews on Goodreads, no ratings, no reviews on Amazon. Those are the 2 places I looked. That covers the whole internet. Case closed. Interesting also, I don't find Groff Conklin personally all that interesting. I find his intros to stories pretty bad. Wasn't a great writer. I didn't realize was Ivy League educated and was apparently incredibly important as an anthologist in the eyes of one Barry Malzberg, who credits him with being the most important anthologist of science fiction of his time. Malzberg had some really die-hard allegiances to somewhat unlikely seeming figures like Conklin. I just have like observed that a bunch. And Malzberg's commitment to the Golden Age material was really deep and really intense. And that's something that I would like to read more about at some point. Anyway, I don't really know anything about the stories in here, and no one else does either. So if you want to read a book that no one else has read in the past 20 years, then maybe that one. The First Dangerous Visions by Ellison. This can get a little bit confusing because both Dangerous Visions and again Dangerous Visions were split up into 3 different volumes to be published in mass market paperback because the original editions or omnibus editions that are really thick. I know at least Dangerous Visions is thick. You can get it in paperback. I have a copy in paperback. It was a hardcover in the first place. There's a lot of, it's not shocking. But anyway, these are floating out there. Also, I didn't know that the last Dangerous Visions, which is Dangerous Visions 3, was finally published last year. Ellison controversially had been kicking that can down the road for like years and years and years and years, and a bunch of people got pissed off at him for it, a bunch of authors, but it came out last year. I don't know if it's supposed to be good or bad or what. I've not read any of them. I don't know. I like Burroughs, I'm kind of a little bit hesitant. Interfaces by Le Guin and Virginia Kidd. This is obviously, maybe not obviously, this is, I think, the same artist as did the, not Lathe of Heaven, her most famous book. What is it? Left Hand of Darkness. Same cover artist, or at least in the same style. And the premise of this anthology was just send us a story. There is no theme, there's no through line, there were no pre-requirements. They just contacted these authors and said, send us a story. They were all published in 1980 originally, which makes me believe that they were probably commissioned for this anthology. Reviews are mixed, but I'm definitely keeping this one, and I'm interested because of the two authors. Virginia Kidd is a fascinating seeming person too. She was a literary agent who represented a lot of really important people like Joanna Russ and like Lafferty, as well as producing some original writing herself. I think she was Woolf's agent as well. Not someone who gets all that much attention, I don't think, but I'm very curious about her. Seems like a great lineup here too. Vonda McIntyre's in here, D.G. Compton's in here, Gene Wolfe is in here, Michael Coney, Tiptree, John Crowley has the first story, so I'll probably be reading that at some point. That's going in the me pile. The Best Science Fiction of the Year, number 13, edited by Terry Carr. Notable because every single story in this edition of this yearly anthology was apparently shortlisted or nominated for a major prize or won a major prize. This is supposed to be like all filler, I'm sorry, no filler, rather, and some more big names in here. Silverberg, Greg Bear, Connie Willis, Michael Bishop, John Sladek, Terry Carr. Supposed to be way above average. He did at least one of these a year. This was the other major pillar of Terry Carr's output, along with the Universe series. I don't know that I've read one before. Orbit 1 by Damon Knight. The Orbit series, Knight started at the outset of the New Wave with the intention of collecting and promoting this sort of avant-garde, what would come to be called the New Wave sort of material. Half of the authors in here are female, and the Orbit series is known for like having good representation above and beyond like most of the other stuff at the time, and is also known for being closely associated with the careers of a handful of people, including foremost among them Lafferty and Gene Wolfe, and I think Russ as well. And I was surprised to see apparently the Orbit series, because it was kind of a front runner of the New Wave, generated a lot of backlash among the old guard, and a lot of authors suffered some like collateral reputational damage by their association with the Orbit series. I would be very curious to read at least the first handful of these. I don't think I've ever read any of them. This one is supposed to not be quite as strong as some of the other ones. A lot of people complaining that the Virginia Kidd novella takes up too much of the runtime. Kangaroo Court apparently is a full quarter of this. So sort of mixed reviews on this one, but historically pretty interesting. And I'm pretty sure I have a copy of that anyway. You would think maybe that this would be a nothing. It might be too dark at this point to really show you the covers, unfortunately. This has taken longer than I thought it would. Christmas on Ganymede edited by Martin Greenberg, someone I will talk about, I think. Science fiction Christmas stories you wouldn't expect to be all that impressive, but the lineup is nuts. Michael Swanwick, Isaac Asimov, there's a Barry Malzberg in here, which shockingly the good readers don't seem to like very much. There's a Frederick Pohl, there's a Gene Wolfe, there's a Connie Willis, and there's some other more conventional stuff. But I read the first like paragraph of the Barry Malzberg, and check this out. For a story to be included in a Christmas book. Romano, Chaplin, the ways of the deity are imponderable. The more intricate and vast the universe becomes to us, the more imponderable they must be. This is the kind of thing which must be understood. It has taken me 40 years to learn it, and I cannot emphasize sufficiently how basic the point is. It goes on in that grandiose style, you know, very Malzbergian. Greenberg, probably the most prolific science fiction anthologist ever, published over 1,000 anthologies in multiple genres, but predominantly science fiction. has a doctorate in political science and was just able to like churn out this massive amount of anthology work, usually in collaboration with other editors, that is renowned for being like consistently above average. Someone that I just had never really like been on my radar specifically. Best from Fantasy and Science Fiction 11th series, Robert P. Mills, editor. Another person I'd never really bothered to pay attention to. Mills took over the editorship of the magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction in '58, I think, from Boucher, Anthony Boucher, and is responsible for launching a lot of careers, producing a lot of work during the most prestigious time of that magazine's history, and Fantasy and Science Fiction was considered like the most prestigious of the genre science fiction magazines, apparently. And then after that went on to work as a literary agent representing, among others, James Baldwin. So interesting guy, apparently, and I don't remember much about the material in this book. There is a Cordwainer Smith in here, Alpha Ralph Boulevard. Also, this has Harrison Bergeron in it, which is one of Vonnegut's most famous short stories. The Shape of Things, edited by Damon Knight. Wow, it is dark. All right, let me pause and redo the camera settings. Okay, that is a little bit better. The Shape of Things, edited by Damon Knight. Important that you actually are able to see this cover art, because that is a somewhat famous work of art by a Russian artist who was one of two brothers. His name is Eugene Berman. They were neo-romanticists, I think is the proper title, painters of these surrealist landscapes. And I just thought it was really striking. I'd never heard of them, and I Google searched them, and their work is totally incredible, totally worth looking into. Eugene Berman. Apparently a pretty good anthology as well, mostly focused on nuclear war and nuclear apocalypse. Has a James Blish, a Henry Kuttner, a Bradbury, a Theodore Sturgeon, Van Vogt, Boucher, and a John D. MacDonald. Someone who comes up in these anthologies every once in a while. Universe 14, edited by Terry Carr. Late in the run, there were 17 universes. I might have already said that, I don't recall. Gate of Horn, Gate of Ivory by Silverberg. There's a Kim Stanley Robinson. There's a Pat Murphy. There is a Carter Schultz as well, The Menagerie of Babel. I don't really remember any details about that one. Revenge of the Rainbow Dragons, Endless Quest, book number 6 by Rose Estes. She is the one who came up with this notion for TSR of doing choose your own adventure books for D&D. TSR apparently considered it, or Gary Gygax considered it like a gimmick that wouldn't last, but these became fairly popular, and these are really collectible now. Rose wrote the first 8. I'm calling her Rose because I don't know how to pronounce the last name. Estes, I think. Wrote the first 8 of these. Not high literature, but apparently like important. And she went on to write some Greyhawk books in the D&D universe, which is notable because Andre Norton was apparently the first writer ever to write a book set in the D&D universe, and it was a Greyhawk book. And I guess Greyhawk attracted, you know, these kinds of writers in the early days. That's the impression that I got. Found this Clint Eastwood book. It just had a kick-ass cover. I don't know anything about it. Couldn't really find anything. It's the novelization of the movie The Gauntlet, which I haven't seen, but I thought that the cover kicked ass, so I got that. City by Clifford Simic. I've talked about a bunch. This is a long video. I won't talk to you about it more here. If you like Bradbury and you haven't seen this before, look into that one. It's an excellent book. The Anarchistic Colossus by A.E. Van Vogt is not a great book, apparently. I probably am going to keep this because it's not a super common book. I don't think. I just don't run into it very much. And I sold a copy, my last copy, on a Whatnot auction and then regretted it because I kind of wanted to read it. Apparently it's terrible. It was written in '77, which is way late in Van Voogt's career. And it's based on like an ANCAP vision of the future where the right wing has destroyed all forms of government on Earth. So it's this like anarchistic, capitalist, like hyper-libertarianized world where society is ruled by these computers who use a form of technology based on, what is it? Kirlian imaging, which was an accidental scientific discovery made in the 30s by a Russian scientist, where he would take a photo plate and place an object on the plate and then run electricity through the plate, and it would produce an outline of the object that was ringed with this nimbus of like what looked like an aura, this like electric light coming off of it. You'll recognize it if you do a Google search for it. And then that got picked up by the New Age movement, and a bunch of people came up with these hocus theories about how the Kirlian tech could photograph auras. And this story has these computers using Kirlian images to read the intentions, sort of a la Minority Report, of all the citizens and punish them for bad vibes. And I guess he just like pulled a bunch of stuff out of his ass and was barely trying in this book, and it's totally incoherent and preachy and borderline unreadable. And apparently Van Vogt wrote books based on his own dreams, which explains a lot of like, I don't know why he, for the most part, apparently I haven't read any but one book from him. Apparently is so scattershot and so all over the map. That's one of the reasons why. This just sounds like such an oddball, bad, like good bad book that I'm probably going to read this at some point. So I'm just going to provisionally put that on the me pile. This is another really famous book from him. This is the second book in the Null series. There are 3 of them. The World of Null A is the first one. Players of Null A, this one is the second one. And then there's Null 3 or Null A3. I don't really recall much about the series other than it's probably his most influential work outside of the one that influenced Alien, The Crimson Death, which was part of, oh man, Voyage of the Space Beagle. One of the most important space operas, influenced Star Trek. And World of Null A launched a bunch of careers, again, foremost among them being PKD. And is supposed to be more coherent, more put together, like a more compelling read than the other Van Vogt. Consequently, sort of less interesting to me a little bit, but I'll read it at some point because it's historically important. But that was a cool, nice condition, vintage copy. Nightfall is upon us, so let's try to get through the rest of these relatively more quickly. This Immortal, tied with Dune for the Hugo in, what was it? Was it 66? Yes, it was, 66. Obviously, Dune, much more famous than this. This is Zelazny's first book. He's known for writing books about like mortal gods, commerce between gods drawn from different ancient pantheons, and mortal humans in science fictional settings where tech and magic kind of blend together. And this is the Greek mythology Zelazny book about a man who is curator of like a human colony based off of the ancient laws of ancient Greece, kept as this human zoo for the benefit of alien tourists. Supposed to be a great book. This is also a Zelazny that I would be interested in reading for sure. This one, maybe not. Bridge of Ashes, also a Zelazny. Apparently not Zelazny in his like farcical, fourth wall breaking, ironic mode. A very serious, possibly over serious Zelazny who was writing experimentally. And the experiment in the eyes of most was a failure, but Zelazny considers this an incredibly important turning point in his own career, a book in the writing of which he learned many important lessons. Don't know what those lessons were, but Zelazny considers it an important book, and it's not a super common one. I'm glad I've decided not to cut the video early so that I can talk about this one in more detail. Death World, a book that I have discussed at some length before, a book that I have read, a book that I really like, by Harry Harrison. Two things. Harry Harrison, I apparently mischaracterized as a somewhat frivolous writer, or I did not perceive the dimension of irony in his work. There are a bunch of snippets from Christopher Priest talking about how Harrison was doing something in his work that is very similar to what Spinrad was doing in The Iron Dream, where he seems to be embodying the ideals and the forms of Golden Age science fiction, pulp science fiction, while thematically satirizing and inverting them simultaneously. And this is just something that I did not pick up on while reading Harrison. I tried Build a Galactic Hero and dipped out of it because I guess I just wasn't paying Harrison enough credit, someone that I want to go back to and reread with those fresh eyes. And Death World is doubly interesting because it has a whole history that I was totally unaware of, where Harrison in general, I didn't know, is a cult figure in Russia. The Russians call him Gary Garrison. There's some fact of the Cyrillic language where G's and H's are pronounced the same way, or something like that. I don't really know exactly the detail, but they call him Gary. And there is a post-Putin era film production company who had incredibly deep pockets, who optioned Death World to be turned into a major blockbuster movie with an unlimited budget. And Harry Harrison was set to co-write the screenplay with Alex Cox, who is the director of Repo Man. And in discussion with this Russian film production company, the producers were casting around for who they wanted to direct it. They wanted a major American director to helm the project, and they would settle for no one other than George Lucas. And they tried to tell them, like, you're not going to get George Lucas. He gives less of a shit than any other American director. He got his action figure money and fucked off to the hills, and you're not going to get him. And he's also a bad director, so you should try for Spielberg. And they said, no, only Lucas. We will only take George Lucas. And therefore, the movie was never made. And Alex Cox has a really funny blog post detailing all of this on his website. I'll try to remember to link it. If I forget to put it in the description of this video, Google Death World, Alex Cox. It's a great read. So kind of a funny story. The book itself is also awesome. I really recommend this one. I found 4 of the 5 Demon Princes books. This is one of Jack Vance's most famous series. I am missing book number 2. And I didn't know until doing a bit of reading that the first 3 books were published, or the stories were published, you know, all contemporaneously. And then there was a 12-year gap until this one and then this one were published. I didn't know that. I need to find, and may have somewhere, a copy of the missing book, but I'm not sure. So I do have copies of those myself, although those are first print, first edition, so those might be the copies that I end up finally keeping. 5 Gold Bands is the first Jack Vance book that I ever read. I'm sorry if some of these covers have ended up blurry. The camera is not really cooperating. I think this is, it's not his first, is it his first novel? I don't remember. I think To Live or Die is his first, I seem to recall, but this is one of the first. This was published 1950, very early Jack Vance, but has a lot of the Jack Vance signatures in it. It's about a guy seeking revenge on 5 different nefarious characters around the galaxy. He finds a magic MacGuffin adventure. I think it's like a prison escape story too. It's been so long since I read it, but I remember really liking it and being surprised because for some reason at the time I thought Jack Vance didn't have a great reputation. This is early days before I knew shit about shit. And this overcame my foolishly low expectations. Super Baby, very obscure book, and oh man, I just damaged this one. No, I didn't. No, I didn't. Some sticker residue pulled off the back of this one. That's fine with me. That is my preferred outcome. We'll get to that one. Super Baby by Felix Mendelssohn Jr. This is a very obscure book about a genetically engineered super athlete who plays baseball real good. X-Men, Air Bud, I don't know. Not something that I would read. People seem to like it who like sports fiction. Obscure book. Memoirs of a Space Woman by Naomi Mitchison, also an obscure book written by a Scottish poet. Sounds totally fascinating. This was reprinted in the women's press in the 80s, and I had never heard of it, and this sounds so interesting to me. It's from the 60s, early 60s, 1962. It's about an anthropologist, like a space anthropologist, working under something like the Prime Directive from Star Trek, reflecting upon first contact with 10 different alien civilizations, apparently very forward-thinking in terms of its treatment of animal rights. Is criticized as being slightly regressive in like its gender politics, apparently, but someone that I'm very, very, very acutely interested in reading and will probably be reading very soon. Definitely a keep for me. Sue Spaceman by Andre Norton from 1950 as well. Regarded by some as a proto-anti-colonialist work of science fiction. Unusually sympathetic portrayal of a Native American protagonist. Other people say, not so fast. It's the opposite. Don't know, I've never read Andre Norton. I've definitely never read this one, but this yellow edition is very collectible. There's no copies available on eBay at the moment with 3 sold. So people want to get their hands on this one. It's got a strange cover on it. It's like a space western. This guy goes to an alien world where he finds people enslaved by aliens and frees them by introducing horses to the planet. Called the Sioux Spaceman, even though there are no Sioux characters in it. I think the protagonist is he Apache? I don't recall. Member of a tribe that is not the Sioux, probably made to be Sioux for the sake of alliteration and marketing, and at that time didn't occur to people that that would be an important detail. Jandrax by Sid Lodgson is his most quote-unquote famous book. He wrote 9 novels. He is still around, still alive. Still around is a callous way to say that. He is still with us. This is a book about a colony ship full of religious fundamentalists that lands on this alien planet, and there is a faction that splinters off, a faction of heretics, apostates, and skeptics, which 2 decades later runs into its own problems and orthodoxies, and the 2 communities find themselves in conflict in this kind of planetary romance setting. It honestly sounds pretty interesting. He's not written anything else that I'm familiar with, but people give this pretty high marks on Goodreads for whatever that is worth. Crystal Griffin by Andre Norton. It's a cool DAW. I don't know, these Nortons, some of the vintage ones are really pretty. This is the first of the High Halleck sequence of books, which takes place in the Witchworld setting. Witchworld is her most famous book. Probably Witchworld and Beastmaster are her 2 most enduring. Beastmaster because it was turned into the movie. Does anybody still remember that movie? I do. This is celebrated by Norton fans. Apparently this is above average for Norton. Dolphins of Altair by Margaret St. Clair is the first of 3 quote-unquote psychedelic novels that she wrote. I really like Margaret St. Clair. I tried to read one of her ace doubles and the short stories were pretty poor. I dipped out, but I read one of her later short story collections that I thought was just sublime. Some of them some of the most inventive short stories I've read. Imagine like a Wiccan Philip K. Dick, and that's Margaret St. Clair, who was a Wiccan and a nudist. And this is, I mean, look at the cover and fill in the gaps of what you think this book is about. And apparently that's what it's about. It takes place in like a Californian commune. I think, is it a commune? I don't know. It has that vibe. It takes place in California. There's talking dolphins who are trying to solicit aliens to destroy the Earth to kill off all the human beings because they're resentful because humans have been killing them for so many years. And there's also military conspiracy, and the occult is involved somehow, and psychedelics as well. I will be keeping and reading this soon. Sounds like a trip. And speaking of dolphin books that are potentially very bad and are a trip, The Goat Without Horns by Thomas Burnett Swan, one of the most unfortunate books that I've ever read, a fantasy book by an English poet who overdoes it. This is one of the most face-palmy books I've ever read. I've talked about it elsewhere, but couldn't say no. I found this at a bookshop around here and picked it up because is it good? Kind of, actually. He's a good writer. Like, his prose is really pretty, but every single decision that he makes is the wrong one in this book. That is the end of the haul. I hope that isn't overly long. If it taxed your patience, you wouldn't be here at the end of the video anyway. If you made it this far, then I appreciate it. And I don't know, I hope that this is an improvement on the old format. I feel that I had more fun recording this than just being like, here's a book, here's a book, here's a book, here's a book, here's a book. We'll see what the response is. Anyway, Whatnot auctions soon, auctions plural. You'll be able to pick most of these up if you want them. And I got a whole stockpile of other stuff that you will be hearing about here or there. All right, talk to you soon. Goodbye.